After you do this, you want to cover it and let it stand about a half hour before brewing. Now we're ready to boil the malt with the hops for 1 hour to produce wort. Add about 4 gallons of water to your boiling pot, leaving a few inches to corral foaming. Then put your pot on the stove and turn on the heat. Now we add the malt. Cut open the packet and squeeze it in. I like to put the packet in the hot water for a bit to make the malt softer, and it makes it a little easier to get the malt out. Once you get the malt out, then you have to stir it. Don't let it settle on the bottom of the pot or it will burn. After the malt is stirred in, turn the heat back on and bring the mixture to a rolling boil. This is an important time to watch for boilovers. I can't emphasize this enough. Every home brewer, no matter how careful, will experience a few. Boilovers are a real mess to clean up, so be careful. The most likely time for boilovers is in the first few minutes of the boil, when it first comes to a boil again after adding the malt. Once the rolling boil starts, we'll add 1.5 ounces of Northern Brewer hops for flavoring. These hops are added at the beginning of the boil to fully extract their flavoring acids. After the initial start of the boil, the danger of a boilover is greatly reduced, and it's safe to go do something else. But remember to use a timer and set it for 1 hour. It's important to boil the wort for 1 hour because boiling scrubs and polishes the wort, removing unwanted proteins through coagulation. To demonstrate this effect, I'll take 2 samples of the wort, one at the beginning and one at the end. This first one now will show us the cloudy, unpolished wort. The boil's been going about 55 minutes now. Let's take a second sample of the wort and compare it to the first. As you can see, the first sample is murky with uncoagulated proteins, while the boiled sample is clear, littered with coagulated protein specks that brewers call trube, along with some pelletized hop specks. Without a vigorous 1 hour boil, your finished beer would be loaded with the uncoagulated proteins you saw in the first sample. After 55 minutes of boiling, it's necessary to add the aromatic Cascade hops. These hops are added at the end of the boil to provide the enticing floral aroma that otherwise would have been boiled away in the 55 minutes of boiling for the Northern Brewer hops. Smell your aromatic hops. The floral scent will soon be in your beer. At the end of the boil, turn off the heat and cover the pot to prevent bacterial infection. Our next task is to cool the wort to near room temperature. Cooling can be accomplished in many ways, although I find it easiest just to put the pot in a sink of cold water. You'll have to change the water about 3 times to cool it off, and it should be cool enough to add to your fermenter in about an hour. If I brew at night, I often leave the covered pot overnight on the stove, but it's best to cool the wort rapidly to encourage the rapid settling of the trube that we've scrubbed from the wort. What we have now is a pot of raw, cooled wort. This is the most dangerous time in brewing. Even your breath carries enough bacteria to infect the sugary wort, producing a sour beer. Now that we've cooled the wort, we'll transfer it into a thoroughly sterilized fermenter. Now we're ready to pour the wort. As you pour the cooled wort, be very careful not to transfer any of the trube, which by now is settled to the bottom of the pot. Trube, if left in contact with your finished beer, will impart a rough flavor. As we can see, we're getting just clear beer out, and the trube is coming up, and you see some of it going in, but when you get the heavy stuff, stop. After you've poured the wort, add enough cold water to your fermenter to make 5 gallons. Now it's time to add the yeast. Take your swollen yeast packet, or reconstituted broth if you're using dry yeast. The yeast packet